Hey everyone, POINDEXTER here, and in this video we continue our playthrough of the solitaire Pacific wargame Fleet Commander Nimitz from Dan Verssen Games, along with the Adversary Admiral Yamamoto expansion. In the last campaign turn, the Japanese took control of Borneo, but US and Australian forces were victorious in New Guinea, destroying all Japanese infantry there. The Japanese also sent a carrier fleet to the Solomons. During the battle, we lost the carrier Saratoga in a first light surprise attack. The U.S. airfield was destroyed, wiping out 4 U.S. land-based aircraft stationed there. We also lost an infantry force. But we destroyed 2 Japanese fleet carriers and a cruiser force, and landed a battalion for reinforcement. The Japanese, however, landed 4 battalions, and U.S. forces are just barely hanging on. So, let's begin our next campaign turn. We start the sequence of play by moving the turn marker 1 space. This turn will take place in May and June of 1942. U.S. resupply is next, and we receive our 21 supply points, placing the appropriate counters in the supply box. Now, let's have a look at what naval forces are available to use this turn. We have 6 cruisers, 2 destroyers, 2 submarines, 2 aircraft carriers, and a battleship. For our land forces, we have 4 infantry and 3 aircraft ready to deploy. Carrier Lexington, however, is damaged, so we'll spend some of our supply points to repair her. This is done by paying 1/2 the cost of the force, rounding down. Lexington costs 5 supply points. Paying half of that amount and rounding down means we'll spend 2 supply points to repair her, which we will do. These are all the U.S. reinforcements we have left. Before we begin purchasing more forces, we need to perform a step that was not shown in the last video. U.S. forces lost 4 land-based aircraft in the Solomons battle. Destroyed land-based air forces are placed in the reinforcement pool to be used again. The same holds true for Japanese land-based aircraft that were destroyed, and we'll place the 2 destroyed bomber groups at the bottom of the Japanese aircraft reinforcement stack. We'll spend 5 points to purchase the carrier Wasp, replacing the lost Saratoga. We'll spend 4 points on the battleship force North Carolina and Washington, and spend 5 points for the 49th Fighter Group, 38th Bomb Group, and the 32nd Infantry. This leaves us with 5 supply points, and we place our new forces in the West Coast. U.S. Scouting is next. We'll spend 3 supply points and place 3 scouting counters on the map. 1 scout goes to Carrier Fleet 4 in the Solomons. A second goes to Carrier Fleet 5 in the Mariana Islands, and the 3rd scout goes to Carrier Fleet 3 in Japan. Now, we begin rolling orders for our scouted Japanese fleets, starting with Carrier Fleet 4. Remember, we add +2 to all scouting dice rolls in 1942, and do not move the resupply count. Carrier Fleet 4 rolls a 5, which is increased to 7 for a refit order. The fleet is moved back to Japan. and we replenish the transport with an infantry force from Japan. We roll scouting orders for Carrier Fleet 5 next. It's a 14, which is increased to 16, and a reinforce order. The fleet moves to an objective with Japanese forces ashore. Of the two areas that apply to this order, the Gilbert Islands has the fewest forces, so the fleet moves there. Carrier Fleet 3 is the last to be scouted. We roll a 9, which is increased to 11, the support order. The fleet will move to an area with Japanese forces already ashore. The area with the least Japanese forces takes precedence, but there are several to choose from, so we'll select one at random. Iwo Jima wins the draw, and the fleet transits here. With our scouting complete, we proceed to the movement step, and the U.S. forces begin their deployment. These are all the forces currently in Hawaii. The Solomons desperately need reinforcement, so we'll send the carrier Yorktown, a battleship, 2 cruisers, and a destroyer, along with a transport carrying the 43rd and American infantries. We'll also send all 3 air forces as well. Hopefully this will be enough firepower to dislodge the Japanese from the island and cover our troops if the Japanese send naval forces this way. We'll place one of our submarines in the submarine raiding box to suppress Japanese reinforcements. We have a few forces left to deploy, and though New Guinea is clear of enemies for the moment, we'll send a small task force around the newly repaired Lexington to the area, along with the 25th Infantry. And we'll move our forces from the west coast to Hawaii. This completes U.S. movement, and Japanese orders is next. We place the Japanese resupply counter in the 0 space and begin rolling for orders. The Gilbert and Caroline Islands both have 2 forces in the area, the Gilberts with a fighter and an infantry force, and the Carolines with a submarine and a transport. We'll begin by rolling for forces in the Gilbert Islands. We roll a 15, a reinforce order. Japanese forces move to an objective with Japanese forces ashore. The battalion will be moved since it is first in the movement order. The only valid area is the Solomons, which has Japanese forces ashore. So we place the battalion on a transport and move it there. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. Surface Fleet 3 is next. It's a 13, an east order. The fleet moves one area closer to Hawaii. The area must also have Japanese forces ashore, so the fleet moves to the Marshall Islands, which fulfills this requirement. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. Surface Fleet 2 in the Solomons, with a total of 2 forces, is next. And it's another Move East order. The forces move one area closer to Hawaii that already has Japanese forces ashore, which is the Gilbert Islands. We also replenish the fleet's transports with infantry from Japan, since the fleet moved to a new area, and we place 2 fresh battalions on the fleet card. The resupply counter remains in its current space after rolling this order. The victorious Japanese forces in Borneo, with a total of 6 forces, are the next to move. It's an 11, a support order. Carrier Fleet 2 moves to an area where there are Japanese forces ashore. The infantry and aircraft will be ignored, since there are no Japanese aircraft in Borneo, and the fleet's empty transports will be replenished with infantry after the move. There are several areas to choose from, so, selecting one at random, the fleet will move to the Caroline Islands. Since the fleet has moved to a new area, we refill the transports with infantry. We take the remaining infantry from Japan first, and take the second from the battalion pool. We advance the resupply counter at 1 space after performing this order. We continue rolling for the remaining forces in Borneo. We roll an 18, a sortie. The order states that 2 infantries are to be moved to an area where there are both Japanese and U.S. forces ashore. The Solomons is the only area where this applies, so 2 Japanese battalions are placed on a transport and moved to the Solomons. We place a moved marker on the remaining battalion since it is not allowed to move out of the area. This completes the orders for the Borneo area. We also move the resupply marker back 4 spaces after performing this order. Battleship Fleet 1 in the Marianas, with a total of 8 forces, is next. We roll 13, an east order. The fleet moves 1 area closer to Hawaii that already has Japanese forces ashore. But Wake has the least forces ashore, so the battleship force moves there. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. The forces in Japan, the last area to roll orders, is next. We begin with Carrier Fleet 1, which is the smaller of the 2 fleets, and a reinforce order is rolled. The fleet and 3 land-based aircraft move to an objective that has Japanese forces ashore. The Solomons and the Gilbert Islands are the 2 choices here. Counting all the Japanese forces in both areas, the Solomons has 7 and the Gilberts have 11. The fleet and the aircraft move to the Solomons since it has the least number of forces. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. We roll orders for the remaining Japanese fleet and land-based aircraft. It's a 12, a south order. The fleet and 2 land-based aircraft are moved to Iwo Jima. The resupply counter is not moved after this order. We roll for the 3 remaining aircraft in Japan. It's an 8, a withdrawal order, which moves then 1 area closer to Japan. But the forces are already in Japan, so it is changed to a hold order. The land-based aircraft remain in Japan, and we move the resupply counter up 4 spaces. This completes the Japanese orders segment. Now it's time to resolve battles. The only battle to be fought is in the Solomons, where the Japanese have sent large numbers of infantry and aircraft reinforcements backed up by a rather small naval support force. It's going to be another active 2 months in the Solomon Islands. So, let's get started. We begin the battle setup by moving U.S. forces to the battle map. We place Yorktown in the U.S. Ocean area, and we'll place a cruiser and destroyer force as escorts. We'll place the battleship and 2nd Cruiser Force, along with the infantry transport in the coastal area. This completes placement of U.S. forces. Japanese forces are moved to the battle map next. The light carrier Ryujo is placed in the Japanese Ocean area since there are infantry on transports in the battle. We place the surface force with the lowest surface attack value in the ocean as an escort, and the remaining ships are placed in the coastal area. Finally, we place carrier aircraft on the decks of both aircraft carriers. This completes the placement of Japanese forces. We now roll for the number of battle turns. It's a 3, and the battle will last for 2 turns. We determine the number of Japanese battle plans next. The Japanese have a total of 15 forces on the map, not counting transports and carrier aircraft, so they will be able to draw 3 battle plans per turn. We now select our battle plans. We start with 3 battle points, but we'll spend our last 2 supply points for 6 more, giving us a total of 9. We'll take the Leathernecks plan for free, since we have Marines already ashore. The plan will stop 1 hit on the island. We'll purchase anti-aircraft for the extra AAA roll, ranging shots for the extra hit on a successful surface attack, furball for the extra hit on a successful dogfight attack, artillery, costing 2 points, which scores an automatic hit on an enemy infantry, AAA, which scores an extra hit after a successful AAA attack, and First Light, which, if we successfully roll a 7 at the start of the turn, we can send our carrier aircraft to attack Japanese ships or ground forces before Japan moves its aircraft. With our battle plans in place, we're ready to begin the next battle in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese draw the first of their 3 battle plans. The first is air combat, which increases the attack values of dogfight and bomb rolls. The second plan is kamikaze attack, which has no effect since this plan is only used in 1944 or 45 campaigns. The third and final battle plan is artillery. U.S. forces ashore will suffer 1 automatic hit from the Japanese battalions ashore during the infantry step. Before we begin the combat turn, we roll a die for the outcome of our first light battle plan. If we roll a 7 or higher, we can launch a surprise attack with our carrier aircraft. And we do roll a 7. We'll send all of Yorktown's carrier bombers to the Japanese ocean area. We'll leave the F-4F fighter behind to fly combat air patrol for the inevitable Japanese attack. The Japanese cannot use their aircraft to attack our force. Only AAA is allowed to fire. We arrange the Japanese ships in 2 rows, one for the carrier and the other for the escort. Both rows will fire their anti-aircraft at our bombers, and both ships will hit on a 2 or less. The destroyer escort fires first and just misses on a 3. The Ryujo fires next and misses on a roll of 9. Our 2 SBD dive bombers dive on the Japanese ships, and one of the bombers scores a hit. The TBD torpedo bombers attack next, but miss on a roll of 9. We apply the single hit to the Ryujo, damaging it. The hit also destroys the carrier aircraft as well. Though we failed to sink the Ryujo, we did knock it out of the battle. With our attack complete, we discard the first light battle plan and proceed with the start of the combat turn. We now move U.S. aircraft. We'll send all our land-based aircraft, a fighter and 2 bombers, to the island area to bomb the Japanese infantry. The carrier bombers cannot take part in this turn as they were used in our first strike battle plan. The F-4F fighter, which was held back during that attack, will fly cover for the ships in the U.S. Ocean. The moving of Japanese bombers is the next step. We roll a die for the area the 2 land-based bombers will move to. It's a 10, and the bombers will move to the U.S. Ocean area. Movement of Japanese fighters is next, and we roll for the area the lone Japanese fighter will move to. It's a 2, the Japanese Ocean, but there are no U.S. or Japanese aircraft here, so we place the aircraft in the next higher location, which is the island. There are U.S. aircraft located here, so the Teinin Kokutai is placed there. Combat now begins, starting with the dogfight segment. We'll start in the U.S. Ocean area with our F-4F fighter against 2 Japanese bomber groups. One of the bomber groups has a dogfight rating, so it will attack the F-4F. We apply the air combat battle plan, which adds +3 to the base attack and +2 to the superior attack value. So the Kanoya Kokutai will hit on a 9 or less and score 2 hits on a 5 or less. And the Japanese score 2 hits with the F-4Fs missing completely. Applying the 2 hits, the F-4F is destroyed. The dogfight over the island is next. The Japanese fighter is guaranteed at least 1 hit thanks to the air combat battle plan, and will score 2 hits on a roll of 6 or less. The Japanese fighter scores 1 hit, but our P-40s do better, rolling a 1, which scores 2 hits. 1 hit is applied to the 8th fighter group, and 2 hits are applied to the Japanese fighter, which destroys it. The AAA segment is next. Yorktown and her escorts are arranged in 2 lines, with both lines firing their AAA at the approaching bombers. The 2 escorts fire first, and our cruiser forces manage to score a hit, which we will apply to the Kanoya Kokutai. We'll immediately play our AAA battle plan, which adds a second hit, and the bomber force is destroyed. We roll for Yorktown's AAA attack next, and the carrier manages to roll a 2, which is the superior value, and 2 hits are scored. The remaining bomber force is destroyed. As of this successful attack, all Japanese aircraft have been wiped out in the Solomons. The bomb runs segment is next, and our land-based aircraft attack the Japanese battalion. But all the aircraft miss. We skip the torpedoes and depth charge segments, as there are no submarines in the battle, and proceed to naval guns. The Japanese cruiser force in the coastal area fires, but misses on a 9. The U.S. surface ships fire next, and they also miss. The infantry step is next, and the infantry forces from both sides battle it out on the ground. Both Japanese and U.S. forces have artillery plans, so we'll play them both now. Both forces score 1 hit on the opposing infantry, with both forces taking damage to their battalions. The infantry advance step is next, and the Japanese land 5 more infantry forces on the beaches. U.S. forces land 2 more infantries on the island. We perform the return aircraft step and land all our remaining aircraft. U.S. forces suffered no airfield losses, though all Japanese air forces were destroyed. Finally, we advance the battle turn counter and begin our final turn. The last turn begins with the Japanese drawing their battle plans. The first plan is damage control, which stops the first hit on any Japanese force this turn. The second plan is first light, but the Japanese carrier Ryujo was damaged by our own first light strike and cannot launch carrier aircraft, so the plan is ignored. The final plan is screening ship, which stops 1 hit on a Japanese carrier. The next step is moving U.S. aircraft. Yorktown will send its bombers to the Japanese Ocean to attack the damaged Ryujo, and will send our land-based aircraft to the island to attack the massive force of Japanese infantry. The combat step begins, and we proceed to the AAA segment, ignoring dogfights since the Japanese have no aircraft left. The Ryujo and her escorting destroyer are formed into 2 lines and will both fire at the U.S. aircraft. The destroyer force fires first and misses on a 6. The Ryujo fires next and misses. Bomb runs are next, and land-based aircraft attack the Japanese forces on the island. The 3rd bomb group scores a hit, but the Japanese play the damage control battle plan, which negates it. Our carrier bombers attack next, diving on the Japanese ships, and the torpedo bombers manage to land a hit on the carrier Ryujo, but the Japanese play their final battle plan, screening ship, which negates the hit. We skip the torpedoes and depth charge segments and perform naval guns. The Japanese cruiser force fires, but misses on a 9. The U.S. battleship and cruiser force fire next, and frustratingly, both forces barely miss. The infantry step is next. 3 of the 4 Japanese battalions ashore attack the U.S. Marines and a battalion, but all 3 forces miss. The U.S. Marines are the only force ashore that can fire, and they launch an attack on the Japanese battalions and score a hit. The hit destroys the damaged Japanese battalion. Combat is now over, and we perform the infantry advance step. 5 Japanese infantry forces move off the beach and are placed in their foxholes, while 2 U.S. infantries are placed in theirs. We perform the return aircraft step next, and all U.S. aircraft return to their respective bases. We suffered no airfield losses, so we advanced the battle turn counter, and the battle in the Solomon Islands is over. We return all remaining forces to the campaign map. With all battles resolved, we return to the sequence of play and the Japanese reinforcement step. When applying modifiers, we add +1 to the final roll per resupply order. Currently, Japanese resupply is on the 4 space, so we would add +4 to the final dice roll. But we must first apply a -1 modifier to all damaged Japanese forces on the campaign map. The only force to suffer damage was the light carrier Ryujo. We flip the counter to its full strength side and adjust the resupply counter 1 space, so we'll add +3 to the final roll. There are no other damaged forces on the map, so we'll take the time to place the destroyed Japanese battalion into the battalion pool for later use. Finally, we apply a -3 modifier for each submarine raider present. We have 1, so the -3 modifier will cancel out the resupply order's +3. We roll for the final amount. It's an 8. The Japanese draw 2 ships, 1 infantry, and 1 aircraft as reinforcements. The Japanese draw another fleet carrier, Junyo, and the Yamato battleship force, along with the 51st Infantry and a Ki-43 fighter. The Japanese have 3 fleets with unused ship counter positions due to forces that have been destroyed, so we'll place the 2 reinforcement ships in one of these empty spaces. But none of the fleet cards have a carrier or battleship type to fill, so we'll add the ships to the fleet card with the fewest number of that type. The carrier Junyo cannot be placed in Surface Fleet 1 since it already has a carrier present, so we'll choose between the other surface forces that have 1 space open. We'll place the carrier with Surface Fleet 2. The battleship force will be placed with Surface Fleet 3, which will bring this fleet back to full strength. The remaining infantry and aircraft will be placed in Japan. There are no other Japanese forces that need repair, so we proceed to the U.S. return to port step. All ships currently in the 1942-45 box are moved to Hawaii, and all U.S. ships deployed on this turn are placed in the 1942-45 box. The U.S. supply check is next. No objectives changed hands this campaign turn, so all U.S. forces remain in supply. Finally, we've reached the U.S. defeat check. We still control 6 objectives, the same number from the previous turn, which is in the historical range, so we are still the fleet commander. With that, the May and June 1942 campaign turn is over. Only 1 battle was fought these 2 months. The Solomon Islands continue to be a hard-fought area for both U.S. and Japanese forces. U.S. forces were successful in eliminating Japanese air forces in the area, and Yorktown carrier bombers managed to damage the light carrier Ryujo in a first light strike. But through a combination of effective Japanese battle plans and the U.S. forces' inability to cause more damage, the Japanese were able to land 5 more infantry forces on the island. U.S. forces are still outnumbered on the ground, so we'll have to continue sending reinforcements and fighting battles in this area for the foreseeable future. The Japanese continued reinforcing their fleets despite the efforts of our submarines, bringing another fleet carrier and the mighty Yamato battleship force into play. However, the Japanese only have 1 ship reinforcement left, so the attrition of their naval forces is beginning to show. Nevertheless, the Japanese still have plenty of forces left in the campaign, which means there are many battles left to fight in the Pacific. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video of Fleet Commander Nimitz.